Okay.
Let's look at these cards, can you give an example of how you would use them? So basically, each one of the 32 ideas.
Okay, so I'm a planner at
Yep.
AN agency, and I have a exploratory workshop with a client to sort of look at innovative new ideas that we could add.
Okay.
Let's say that's a fairly typical situation, isn't it? And we've got a day together. And somebody did this workshop recently. I sent them off with a pack of cards to Venice, and they ran this workshop with an international sun care client. What you do is you sit with a pack of cards, and if you're doing this in the full sense, you'll go through it and say of these 32 ideas, there are 6 or 7 that our market usually does. So I am Wonder Bra. I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time looking at this card here, which says erotic, because we're all saying our bras are sexy.
Yeah.
And I might even also think, well, there's a lot of things in my market which are exclusive in the sort of Rigby impeller world, and I'm just sort of being lucky with these cards. So the idea would be to rule out the 6 or 7 things that we usually do, and to think through not only the stuff that we typically do, but that our competitors do. And it's sort of, it's all those ideas which you feel comfortable with. So you're sitting in a beer meeting and somebody says, I know, let's do something with this type of comedy, and everybody's comfortable because it's comedy, and if it's not comedy, it's sport, and if it's not sport, etc. But what you do is you rule out those obvious ideas and try and look beyond the obvious by looking at some of the other cards. So if I was in the Wonder Bra meeting and we turned over a card which said cooperative, that's sort of interesting. It's either completely irrelevant, or there is something. For instance, I knew a sports company that did a sports bra amnesty in their shops, because the insight was that women have, most women have a shoddy sports bra and they should hand it in and buy a new one. And there was some sort of sense, like the knife amnesty, of sort of doing something in the community. It's a different sort of idea than saying our sports bras are glamorous and will make you like this top tennis star and so forth.
So idea number 1 is the bra amnesty, basically.
Yes, that would be.
Simple as that.
That would be it.
Okay.
I'm not going to do this whole exercise on bras, though, surely,
because that's spooky.
Yes, it was just the first 3 cards. So that's what you would usually do. What I would do if I was just sitting playing with these, as opposed to in a set piece workshop, is I wouldn't bother working out which ones we'd already used. I would simply turn cards and say, look, there's a card which says habits. I look in my thing here and I see that's things like Nando's, which gets me to go and sit down at the table and have my food brought to me, or it's things like Haagen-Dazs, owning an occasion, and so forth. And I would think, okay, occasion-based marketing. So I believe these sun care people got a lot of ideas out of this to do with owning the weekend as opposed to the holiday, and so forth, and thinking about how do people prepare to go out, and how can we get them using sun creams and all this kind of stuff. And it's mostly to stimulate you to think about stuff which in another market would be second nature, but in the sun cream market, people have assumed for decades of their marketing that it's all about the moment when you go on holiday and getting into the suitcase and setting it at the airport. So it's a bit of a departure to be thinking about use on the weekend.
Have you ever arranged them deliberately as a kind of assault course or a workout? So in effect, you're forcing people to go down a channel they're going to be uncomfortable with, because it's in effect alien territory for them.
You get there anyway, because half the ideas are just completely ridiculous. You cannot think of let's turn a card. Oh, that's unfortunate. I've got a card which is about appreciation, like Oddbins teaching me to appreciate wine. I was going to say, for a bank, you couldn't think of an appreciation idea, but actually, sort of Motley Fool would be a good example.
Yes,
that's another one. Control, okay, that's banking too. Crowds, yes. NatWest music festivals.
Yes.
Scandal. You're unlikely to think of a good idea for a bank that involves scandal. Scandal, here's a picture of somebody. Somebody appears to have a straw up their nose.
Yes.
It's sort of with possible reference to Kate Moss, who was in trouble at the time. You're unlikely to think of a good idea for a bank that involves scandal. You're likely to think of quite a few bad ideas, because you're supposed to be safe and reputable and things like that. You don't want to be the sort of fly-by-night cowboys. Let's leave that to Tango and Pepper Army and other sorts of people. So that would be a bad idea. Almost in principle, you're not going to have a good idea like that for a bank.
Okay, so what you're saying is, with the 32 cards, although it sounds terrifying, you've got a whole group of people waiting on you, you've got a limited amount of time in a workshop. Typically, to work through the 32 cards, Do you find you take an hour over it, 2 hours? Well, I mean, what would you expect?
I think most workshops properly take a day. You could easily get some ideas in a couple of hours using these playing around. I think agency people are very fast and come up with ideas quickly and get bored quickly, and could use this to stimulate an early discussion on a pitch or something like that much quicker. But I think you need the reason you need so much time in a workshop is you need time for people to have proper ideas as opposed to brainstorming ideas. So rather than just shouting something out, to sort of work something through, you need time for all the syndicate groups to present to each other and all that kind of stuff. So the whole thing.
And because they're cards rather than one idea at the front, in principle you can deal cards to people who then say, well, from these, here's my favourite idea and here's the one I absolutely wouldn't do anything with, and then other people can dispute with them. So in that sense, it's much more...
I think the basic... There's two things which kind of give them a basic safety net of validity. One is, I remember working years ago with this facilitator who had a technique which I've copied many times, and he would work mostly in design and packaging, and what he would do to stimulate to people, we were working on a project I think that was to do with whiskey, to stimulate people to think about whiskey differently, he would put a random object next to it. So I remember it was green frog and then a whiskey bottle, and you're supposed to make something out of that, and of course you make something organic, World Wildlife Foundation like, etc., and you get into a territory which whiskey doesn't sit in because it's in sort of Dickensian sepia, that kind of stuff, and suddenly it's in this area which is green,
tradition,
which is sort of interesting. Even just having a green bottle is interesting, like having a clear absolute bottle is interesting.
Yeah.
And putting up any of these cards against your brand, if it creates surprise, the mind automatically tries to fill that gap, and it's a good, creative, stimulating technique just to get people's juices flowing. So that gives it a sort of anchor of validity. The other thing is that these are all based upon real ideas which have worked in somebody's market. So there's an idea in here that's worked for World of Warcraft in China. Nothing like that's ever been tried in your market, but there are real marketing ideas in the world which work on these sorts of principles. So all you've got to do is say, could that sort of thing work for us? If it doesn't, then fine, because that's why you've got so many of them. But quite often you'll get a whole stream of ideas just from looking at one of these cards, and it just going into areas where it's not completely unexplored territory, and there's a whole map of reassuringly successful marketing campaigns and ideas and stunts and so forth.
So at one level it's disruption, and the other level it's case studies, because you've demonstrated with at least 2 case studies for every single idea you come up with, where it's being used as a main idea or a peripheral one.
And what I think people, I've noticed people quite often work from the case studies. So what they do is they turn a card and it says, again, the top one, habit, and sort of habits you can sort of think around that. But when you think of brands like Starbucks and Haagen-Dazs and Nando's and so forth, or Yo Sushi, which have established particular customs and patterns of interaction, or if you look at the websites like Amazon and eBay, where there's a patterned experience and something like buy it now sort of exists in your routine of behaviour, then it's much easier to transfer, and you go, okay, we're an internet bank, why don't we have that much ritual? Where is our handshake when you enter our site? Where is the shortcut to look at how my finances are going to look in a year's time? Etc., etc. And it's easier to construct new ideas out of existing ones.
So you can bridge from the case studies rather than the concept themselves, which may be a bit...
Yes, the concept is necessarily abstract, that's string together a number of examples.
I haven't checked recently, but is any one of those ideas Virgin?
Any one of Virgin have a whole molecule of ideas.
I was just thinking of the number of times where Virgin comes up in brainstorms. I just wondered if there's any one territory that where have you put Virgin in the film?
I put them in exotic, was Virgin Atlantic, and I'd have to remember why, but I think it was I think it was about the destination marketing and using the excitement of Cuba. Because everybody else is British Airways, so it's where you fly from, and Virgin are all about where you fly to, starting with Atlantic. And they use the excitement of destinations. I call that exotic, because holidays are exotic, and it's going back to bounty adverts. I tried not to use, I think, too many examples from Apple and Virgin and so forth, just because they're a good example of anybody's theory.
Sure. Well, what it therefore means is that you now potentially have a new galaxy of stars coming up, and Nando's and so on, which represent different types of marketing to replace the cliches of Apple and Virgin.
And I've tried to make it quite diverse. So there's things like Channel 4 Cricket and McKinsey and Nurofen and Kentucky Fried Chicken and BlackBerry. I just think having one of the ruts we get into is is kind of ghettoised thinking. So we're quite a cool youth agency, then all the examples we look at are cool youth examples. Now, as a strategic shape, there might be something very different, like a bank is doing, or an internet service, that we wouldn't have considered because it's not in the realm of cool ideas that we're all into, and so we end up copying stuff that's very close to what we're doing now.
Yes.
And they aren't particularly, I wouldn't hold this up and say here are 100 of the best marketing ideas in the world. They're not all the ones which won all the high awards at Cannes, although some of them did. But what they have got is a sort of, and they're not all new, but they've got the kind of necessary diversity just to stretch your thinking out a bit and to turn over a few extra cards or
Okay.
stones.
Maybe you covered it already, but one of the things which it seems to me this is quite good at is that where you have a very defined market area, where you have very strong competitor brands, the whole kind of challenger environment, it also allows you to take out or to put to one side the very strong ideas and to decide to what extent you want to parody them or undermine them, and to what extent you're simply concentrating on building your own molecule, and to what extent you are either being a parasite or deliberately jinxing or zagging against a strong competitor. Have you done
Do
much
you
of
have a
that?
market in mind?
Ooh, that's a nasty question.
No, I'm just trying to make
I'm
sure
just
I
trying to think of an example. Well, in other words, I can see very simply that you can say, look, we've already done that. So I've taken 3 cards out. We're not
Yes.
going to go back to sports bras, but we could take a market like shampoo, where you might actually have a whole lot of relatively strong brands with fairly hefty budgets that may already be doing something on convenience, like wash and go. They may be doing something on natural values. Is Silvercrin still banging on about Nordic blondes? But you know what I'm saying. Where there's a whole notion of natural, which may have evolved into being more global than Nordic.
Yeah,
and
it's
blonde.
I mean, detergents would be another example, and then Persil coming in with hippie parenting
Yes.
is clearly an outlier.
Yes.
Wherever you drew the boundary around sort of washing whiter and cricket white, and there were certainly family values in there, but the whole notion of barefoot parenting
Yes.
and letting your kids play in the dirt just wasn't within the value set of what was being considered. And yes, you could have got to that by not allowing yourself to talk about sort of hygiene or control or order or lots of other things. And indeed, now you're saying it, one of the good things to do with the set that you've taken out, which I hadn't thought of before, but if you took out a series of cards, you could say, this is what we conventionally do. Actually use the Boulet-Drew disruption trick and say, actually, how could we absolutely do the opposite of that?
Yes.
That would be quite a good thing to do with the cards you've taken out.
And it also allows you to say, as I was talking to a brand manager only yesterday, it's we haven't got very much money, and what we're really, really scared of is XYZ is going to come over the border and get us. But then you can actually say, how do you think they'd do that? What are the actual tools that they would use to do that conventionally, being the kind of big multinational?
There's an interesting
so it's almost defensive war games.
There's a case study in here called Let's Kill Links, and it's based on my suspicion that a brand which, on the one hand, which says spray more to get more, and says this will make you irresistibly attractive to women. I did a survey in the Ministry of Sound office, and 49 out of 50 women told me that the smell of links was repugnant. There is a clear Achilles heel, which is what if somebody brought something out which 7 out of 10 cats preferred it?
Yes.
And you just make a smell that women liked rather than one that men liked, say, and then you would put a brand behind it, and this explores all sorts of different cards and ways that you can promote that. I had an interesting email for somebody who's on secondment at the ACTS Global Research Centre, who's writing a paper on it, what are our Achilles heels, and
Yes.
was really interested in this paper. And I think that kind of wargaming, the Jack Welch thing of, he called it destroy your own business, but actually come up with the idea that could be our nemesis, then make sure you do it first.
Yes, so it's kind of nemesis planning. Although I'm sure there's an actual brand idea there, as about 48 out of 50 Ministry of Sound women found this fragrance irresistible as a communication strategy and so on.
But that's right. I was very interested in the one that did but she said she had to think about plumbers.
Oh yes, so that was another one of them. Okay, fair enough. Okay, thank you very much for your time, and good luck with the book.
Should we do a reading? Was that?
Yeah, let's do a reading. Yes.
Thank you.
Had you got an example?
What brand should we work on? Not one of my clients.
Not one of your clients. Something which is completely new, which we admire, and which is doing something quite interesting at the moment.
Well, who's a bit stuck?
Who needs to?